Good evening. This is Barkha Dutt. You're with the Mojo Story, our platform that looks at the big issues every day for a deep dive analysis. We continue to keep our focus on Afghanistan, where the Indian embassy has now been evacuated. Let's bring you our top story at this hour. The Indian ambassador is among diplomats and Jawans to come back home. The embassy has been evacuated, and there is no certainty around when it may resume normal operations again. Now, the Indian Air Force launched a special operation, as I said, to bring home diplomats, journalists, ITPP Jawans, and a host of others. It is going to be some time before that evacuation of all Indians who want to come back home can be completed. In the meantime, the government has also announced emergency visas for all Afghans. India, among the few countries in the world that is opening its doors to Afghans who are wanting to leave the country. But there is some ambiguity and some confusion because a prior statement from the foreign ministry kept its focus on religious minorities in Afghanistan, specifically mentioning Hindus, Sikhs, and what the statement called Afghan partners. So, will there be a filter of faith when it comes to India's refugee policy for the Afghan people who may want to escape the Taliban? It's not clear yet because, as I said, there are two of these developments that have taken place. But either way, will India have to reset its foreign policy in the face of a Pakistan China axis? Three major embassies still functioning in Kabul. No surprises there are Russia, China, and Pakistan. Let's bring up our panel of experts today to look at these dramatic developments in Afghanistan. We're joined by AS Daulat, who's of course been the former RANW chief. Welcome, Daulat Saab. Pleasure to have you on the program. Also joining us from Colombo this evening is Ashraf Haidari. He's the Afghan ambassador to Sri Lanka, has been a strong advocate against the Taliban. Where does he stand today? What happens to diplomats like him? And where does he see the future of his country are only some of the questions we'll put to him. We're also joined by Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, who's of course a veteran diplomat, retired now. Thank you, Ambassador Prakash. Pleasure to have you back with us. Also joining us, another veteran diplomat is Ambassador TCA Raghavan, who's served as High Commissioner to Pakistan among many stints that he's been part of in his diplomatic corps. And finally, we're joined by Christine Fair, who's a foreign affairs analyst and also a professor at Georgetown University. Welcome, Christine. Pleasure as always to have you. Let me start by sort of putting this question to you, Ambassador Raghavan, if I may. The fact is that India is looking at a set of shrinking options. And I do remember earlier on this program, you had made the point that battlefield reality would decide the outcome of what happened next and not diplomacy. And here we are. We have a Taliban-led government. We have the Indian embassy evacuated. And we have an open door policy for Afghan refugees with some confusion over who we're going to prioritize. My question is this. For India to continue leverage in the face of a China-Pakistan axis, do you think we've taken the right steps thus far?
Well, I think given the scale of the change in Afghanistan and the swiftness with which it has come about, it is impossible not to have the impression that whatever we may have done or not done, this outcome could not have been prevented. The fact that the Afghan forces were able to move in so rapidly has surprised everyone. And certainly it suggests that there was a very significant demoralization of the government, of the military. Perhaps, although it would be too early to say so, perhaps the only silver lining in this situation is that there has been no significant fighting and no major damage from what one can make out to cities and to infrastructure in the process of this change. But I think that given the swiftness of the change and the scale with which in which it has taken place, I don't think our policy options really made much of a difference to the outcome.
But now the outcome is done, right? The outcome is behind us, Ambassador Raghavan, and we are faced with a situation where we need to assert influence, leverage in the region, and we have chosen and opted to evacuate our people. But obviously that can be a temporary measure. We're waiting to see what shape and form this regime actually takes, and in the meantime, we're opening our doors for the Afghan people. Do you think that we should be opening our doors unequivocally for anybody looking to escape persecution? And if it is religious minorities, might that not also include the Hazaras, for instance, who, despite being Muslim, there's a long history of persecution at the hands of the Taliban previously? Ambassador Raghavan.
Well, we don't have a, we are not a proximate state to Afghanistan in the sense that there is no physical border directly with them. So there will always be limitations on how many refugees can actually seek refuge in India. But through history, India has had generally a very, very open policy as far as giving refuge to minorities, to other citizens fleeing persecution or fearing persecution. This applies to Afghanistan in the past also, and I don't see any change in that. Although there will always be limitations on the numbers which will come in. As you know, we have, in a relative sense, a significant population of Afghans already in India, a very large number of students, medical patients, and others who live here. And they will, of course, face a great deal of uncertainty. So will their family members back in
Mhm.
Afghanistan. You're quite right about Afghan Sikhs wanting to come to India in case they face persecution. But I think we are still at the very early stages of this whole
So do you
process.
think so the question for the panel, and I'll open this up now. Have we done what we ought to have, and have we done what we needed to, both from what we stand for as an Indian state and also our own self-interest, obviously? Ambassador Prakash, can I get you to also respond to this? There's been a great deal of consternation that the original foreign ministry statement specified religion. It spoke of Hindu and Sikh Afghan people who may be looking to come to India, and then it spoke about Afghan partners. A subsequent sort of announcement has made it clear that the emergency visa is open to all Afghans to apply for. So, a certain degree of confusion there. Do you believe it is inevitable that there will be a filter of faith as applied to this? And do you think that that is even smart? Ambassador Vishnu Prakash. So, you're on
We are.
mute. Yeah, we can hear you now.
I'm still on. Okay. Question is good evening, Barkha. Question is why are we getting people out? The people that we are trying to get out or we are promised to get out are the most vulnerable segment of the society. Now, in the Taliban regimen, if the Taliban 2.0 is the same, and chances are it's the same, it will be the minorities who will be targeted. So obviously, we would like to get those Hindus and Sikhs and Christians who are there of Indian origin are the most vulnerable. So obviously, we will try to get them out. And again, the fear psychosis is such. If you look at the pictures of yesterday, people not caring for their lives and clinging on to the aircraft. So obviously, there's a panic, and in this panic, if there's a choice today, millions of Afghans would like to leave the country. So nobody is suggesting, neither you nor I or anybody, that we should open the doors for millions of people. It's not possible. So within our resources, given the fact that we do not share a border, we have to airlift them. So whatever we can do, we are doing. And I think under the circumstances, the way it has panned out, given the uncertainties, we have done a fair job, a very good job rather, why fair, of getting our people out. And now that we have decided to issue e-visas, I welcome that move. So we will continue to do that, Barkha.
And do you agree, Ambassador Prakash, before I open this for a larger discussion, with the Foreign Ministry statement that focused on after Indian citizens, which for any country, their own citizens will come first. After Indian citizens, the focus has been on the Hindu and Sikh minorities in Afghanistan and what India has called partners, which could mean people who've worked on projects, who could be assets otherwise, who could be established friends. Do you agree with that? And how do you respond to the criticism that a filter of faith is self-defeating? Because you have Pakistan and China exercising great influence to our detriment in this region.
Let
Now,
Pakistan let Pakistan and China do what they are. We are not in competition. The Pakistani involvement or Pakistani influence is going to boomerang. They are wearing a crown of thorns. What Pakistan has been up to there is known. China, in my view, has taken a completely unscrupulous and opportunistic stance, but more about that later. We will, of course, be able to help assist people, Afghans, who have been working with us, who have been supportive. So it is very natural for us to get them out.
okay, you are seeing pictures on your screen of those Indians coming home. They came via Jamnagar, and the Air Force doing a sterling job there. But it is going to be a minefield of a walk for India ahead. Ambassadors Raghavan and Vishnu Prakash are saying that the best that could be done from a set of limited options has already been done. And before I come to Christine and Ashraf, I just want to get AS Daulat. Do you believe, Mr. Daulat, that we have done what we ought to have and what we should have? I think those are both questions. Obviously, there are no absolute academic principles that can apply. I've been one of those who's been arguing against engaging with the Taliban. I don't see what we get out of it. I see it very much as a Pakistan project, but it has been pointed out to me, and I take that point that even this evacuation of our people would not have been possible without some sort of tactical outreach with the Taliban. Daulat Saab, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement with what our ambassador said earlier. And what we've done now in the last couple of days in the very difficult situation. But I must say that to my way of thinking, our foreign policy has been flawed for quite a while now in Afghanistan. Uh, we've been hanging on to the American coattails for a very long time, and it's been very clear that the Taliban is going to come back to power. Everybody knew this. And except it seems us that, uh, we didn't seem to think that the Taliban would come back. Now, while we were hugging Ashraf Ghani, he was getting ready to leave. And the Americans, in any case, were leaving. And they had been talking to the Taliban for a long time. I'm sure we would have links with the Taliban. I don't doubt that. But what is coming out is that, or what we are showing is that we don't want to have anything to do with the Taliban. I'm sure we will, in course of time, like you
But are you
suggested.
suggesting otherwise? Are you suggesting otherwise? I mean, one of the key members of the Taliban is from the Haqqani network, a terror group that has long inflicted sort of attacks on India. And I could go on about why the Taliban's enmeshed relationship with the Al Qaeda, with the ISIS, with the Jaish, with the Lashkar. All
What,
of you
what,
know all this much better than I do, Daulat Saab.
what the Taliban is, the fact is, it is a reality now in Afghanistan. It has been a reality before and is going to be a reality again. And let's not forget, somebody said that Afghanistan has been the graveyard of empires. The British learned this a long time ago, and in the last 40 years, we've had the Soviet Union moving out or having to leave Afghanistan, and now the Americans. So, to say that the Taliban is a terrorist organization, I don't think it's going to do us any good in the future.
But I mean, it may not do us good, but it's the truth.
But you just suggested and you just said, Barkha, that, without the Taliban help, evacuation would not have been so easy. It would not have been so comfortable. So if the Taliban is already willing to cooperate in evacuation, why are we presuming that they would not be willing to cooperate in the future?
Okay, this is where we are now, and let me bring in Professor Christine Fair and Ambassador Ashraf Haidari. Christine, to you. We've had the American president double down on his decision to pull out. We've had him actually lash out at the Afghanistan military, saying if they weren't ready to fight for themselves, why should the Americans fight for them? Forgetting that I think 66,000 Afghans have lost their lives in the last 20 years. And you
More than
have a
that.
kind of, yeah, more than that. Well, okay. And you have a kind of moving on that's already taking place within 72 hours, including, frankly, here in India, because the options appear to be so limited, and every country is going to act from its own sort of complicated self-interest. Go ahead, Christine.
Yeah, so I'm not a fan of these tropes of Afghanistan as the graveyard of empires. Each of these regimes had different interests and different strategies that they use in Afghanistan. And actually Talis did the math. Afghanistan has actually been conquered something like a dozen times. But why is that a measure that's interesting? Let's talk about what happened to the ANA. What President Biden said last night angered me to my core. Why did the ANA collapse? Well, first of all, the training that the Americans and our partners gave to the ANA was shambolic. It changed in 6-month cycles. It was delivered through contractors. We insisted upon putting them on American weapon systems, which is a really inappropriate choice for a largely illiterate and innumerate military. The Afghans do not have any sort of air support. The Americans had been providing that. The Afghans don't have casualty evacuation. They don't even have basic hazardous environment first aid. So if they get shot, they're basically thrown into the back of a Hilux and they bleed out before they can get help. Also, the Afghans are not, they're losing, prior to this debacle, they were losing about 40 soldiers a day. Right. So how can we expect the Afghans to fight under those circumstances? Also, the Taliban were targeting their families. This is just ridiculous to expect the ANA to have been suicide operators. Second, the idea that Biden targeted Afghans' political leadership is really beyond the pale, because most people don't understand that the Americans foisted upon Afghanistan a political process that was always intended to produce unstable and illegitimate leadership. We can begin looking at the way the Constitution was devised, the acquiescence to Karzai that political parties not be allowed to function. But I don't think people understand the deleterious consequences of the single non-transferable vote. You will have, for example, in the district of Kabul, you'll have something like 700 people contesting the 30, I believe it's 33 seats. So the person that won that seat in 2014 did that with single digits of the electorate. This is not a system that would ever produce a consensus leader. And this isn't the Afghans' fault. This is the situation that the Americans foisted upon them because we wanted a system where we could control the Afghan government. And I'm just going to say in passing, the other story that gets told repeatedly to Americans is that we've spent 2.3 trillion and the Afghans are so corrupt. Well, newsflash, the vast majority of that 2.3 trillion came back to the United States economy in contractor fees. And this corruption that has become so popularized as a narrative for our cutting and running, the Americans themselves built this corruption into the system. Again, we did this because we wanted, it's for the same reason that corruption exists in the Indian political system. You want to be able to,
or any system, right?
oh,
Now
well,
yeah.
for any system, right? In our system, it's regularized through lobbyists, right?
Yeah.
So, but we took advantage of this situation and we built it. And for President Biden to then turn around and say the Afghans aren't standing up, the Afghans have to do this, when we gave them tools that were precisely intended to produce these outcomes, is beyond acceptable to me.
Okay, you're angry, but now what? The point is we are at a
There
now
is
what
no
moment.
So, quite frankly, there is no now what. The Pakistanis have won. And I really also am tired of people talking about the Taliban as if they are insurgents. They are not insurgents. They are a fully owned subsidiary of the Pakistani state. The Pakistanis have invaded, they have occupied Afghanistan. The Taliban, all of these stories that they're not going to be the same as they were, also rubbish. We can see for ourselves what the Taliban are doing. They don't need international legitimacy. They don't want it because what do they have? They have the Chinese. So, I'm never an optimist. I don't think I've ever said anything optimistic about this situation, in part because no one ever wanted to deal over the last 20 years with the real problem. That was Pakistan. It was Pakistan, 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 coupled with our own duplicity and incompetence. So look, going forward, and
thank you for saying that, because I do think that we are pretending as if this is something that we can still calibrate our way through. I don't know what's going to happen next, but this is what it is. It's the Pakistan project.
To use a technical term, India is screwed.
Okay, only you would say that, and I'm going to get everybody to respond to that. Are they looking at it in the same way? But I must get Ambassador Ashraf Haidari first. Ashraf, if I can ask you, a few days ago I asked you, would you still be ambassador X number of days later? Here you are. As of now, you're still ambassador. We don't know what's going to happen. You've been speaking vociferously against the Taliban. What now, sir?
Well, I continue speaking for the values that we have espoused and the achievements that we have had: democracy, freedom, human rights, women's rights, everything that the whole world has been assuring us of, including the recent statement made by the UN Secretary General, and he went one by one, saying exactly that these achievements that the people of Afghanistan have made, must be sustained, and that the process should emerge where all Afghan voices are included, whether it's through a transitional administration. Then
are you still hopeful of that, or do you agree with Christine that this is a Pakistan invasion?
That's, I think, quite well known. I don't need to say that. The whole world knows that the Taliban would not have succeeded in achieving their end goal without external support, and the evidence is all over the place that without external support, without externality, our forces, after bleeding so much, having lost 70,000 young men in this war, they would have already, finished off the Taliban. Probably.
What are you expecting now, Ashraf, to happen? Before I take it back to the panel, Ambassador Ashraf Haidari, what are you hopeful can still happen? Imran Khan, who you see on your screen, has actually called this the unshackling of chains, calling this a moment of freedom. It's quite clear how Pakistan sees this, right? What do you as an Afghan diplomat expect or hope can still happen?
Well, our hope is that this coordination council, which former President Karzai has put together and included the chairman of the High Council for Reconciliation, as well as the leader of Hizb Islami, all of whom have been in talks with the Taliban. And as we know, the Taliban have not declared an emirate yet. They're still waiting to see, how they can also include other voices and leadership from the council, and as well as others who have also recently visited Islamabad, representing different ethnic groups in Afghanistan, where, of course, they also, from what I heard, that they also too, demanded inclusivity. And so it all remains to be seen. On the one hand, just on the short run, just over the next week or month, how the Taliban would deliver on the rule of law and governance and all those issues, getting back the state institutions on their feet in Kabul, as well as across Afghanistan. But then also moving on to, formation of a government that includes, all other Afghans, but also to consolidate the achievements that we have had, beginning from human rights, women's rights, and the socio-economic achievements that we have had.
But, sir, as we talk, the pictures you're seeing on your screen are those extremely disturbing pictures of actually bodies falling midair, hurtling to death, of Afghans who attach themselves to the undercarriage of planes taking off from the Kabul airport. And, I just kept thinking of The last time we saw something like that was when 9/11 actually happened, which is where this all started, when you saw bodies fall out of the Twin Towers. Now, I want to come back in this sort of, this macabre truth that we confronted with, to Ambassador Raghavan and Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, to what Christine Fair said, and also to AS Daulat. Pakistan has won. This is a Pakistan invasion. India is, actually effectively without any immediate options. Ambassador Raghavan, you first. What do you say?
I would certainly agree that the concert which we were part of, and because of which we occupied a prominent place to some extent in Afghanistan for the past 20 years, that concert has been decisively defeated. And admittedly, there is a great feeling of triumphalism in Pakistan, not least because this is also seen as a defeat of India. But what is often not stated clearly is that there will also be a certain amount of worry and concern in Pakistan itself about the character of the new Taliban, or the character of the regime, which is going to be just next door to them. In my view, now that this change has taken place, we should choose our policy with some care, and we should pre-lock ourselves into a position by looking at Pakistan, looking at Afghanistan.
Okay, we sort of lost you there. Ambassador Prakash, if you want to just jump in, I think what I'm hearing Ambassador Raghavan say is that we need to sort of reset this policy, but, reset it to in what framework? What are the realistic options? There's one option to be the country that stands with the Afghan people, and we've already indicated that we will do that as much as possible. But in real terms, when Daulat Saab says that there's no point going on iterating that this is a terror group, the fact is that it is a terror group. It is a project of Pakistan. It is enmeshed right with all of these terror groups. What are our options, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash?
Well, normally Raghavan and I agree on whatever, because even as a spokesperson, Raghavan did not give me any information, and I said, just please defer to Raghavan. Now that I've let out my steam, let me say what what is the difference between a revolutionary and a terrorist? A terrorist, if he succeeds, becomes a revolutionary. And I am making a sweeping statement, but India, we know, have had so many cases where insurgents were co-opted in the system. So that is point one. I don't think that Taliban will be any different. I have been on record to say that a wolf in sheep's clothing still remains a wolf, but they are making certain statements. I'm not taking them at face value. One is not naive, but to just discard them out of hand also, I don't think is a very smart move. Taliban is not monolithic. They have huge divisions. They are trying to consolidate themselves. If on an outside chance they want to play the long game and want to provide some kind of an administration, even if it is a half-baked one, and actually they manage to control their cadres, which are going haywire. We know in the occupied places where they are already in power what they are doing. If I think, and that they will be in power for a certain time, if there's a possibility of working with them, not agreeing with them, I think realpolitik will demand that we should at least see and keep our options open.
And you don't think it upends, sir, sorry, I have a brief counter question to you, Ambassador Prakash. You don't think it upends all of our positions on terrorism and these groups that they're in bed with?
No, Barkha, there is nothing static. Nothing is static. The only constant is change. You take a position depending on the situation that obtains. Now, we have two options. One, we say, no, the Taliban, even if it is mending its ways, and please, I reiterate, I do not expect them to, even if they are half mending their ways, we will not talk to them. I don't think that that's a very good notion. We do not agree with them. We are as similar as chalk and cheese, but in case there is a possibility, because they are in command, by engaging with them, we will in fact mitigate the chances of they causing complications for us.
Okay.
And as far as Pakistan is concerned, I don't think that it is. Uh, Today they may be rejoicing, but fact also remains that Pakistan used Taliban during the 20 years in wilderness like a checkbook, and they played both sides. They handed over mostly Al Qaeda leaders, but at times Taliban. There are problems, and I don't think that Taliban will be a puppet of Pakistan once they consolidate themselves. Where they train their guns, whether they challenge the Durand line. Christine is an expert, and I must say that Christine, I'm very happy to be on the same panel because one has read lots and lots of what you write. But it is not not a total success. They are going to have problems because Taliban can also create problems for Pakistan. Barkha.
Okay, that's an interesting thought. I just want to let Ambassador Raghavan complete his point before we lost him there briefly, and then I'll come to AS Daulat. Go ahead, TCA Raghavan.
Well, I was, I think, trying to say some of what Vishnu already said, that I don't think we should now pre-lock ourselves into a position that our enemy number one has taken over and therefore we are out of Afghanistan. I think that would be a wrong posture. We have to see what happens on the ground and then decide, because unlike the US, unlike the UK, and unlike others, we are part of the region and we shouldn't divorce ourselves from what is happening around us. So certainly looking at Afghanistan purely through the India-Pakistan prism or through the prism of Pakistan would be, in my view, the wrong approach.
Daulat Saab, all three of you at least seem to be on the same side, that actually realpolitik demands that we, while standing, and we're seeing those numbers of the Sikhs and Hindus who were persecuted. There are also numbers of how other religious minorities like the Hazaras were persecuted. But all three of you seem to basically be, if you can come out of this now, please, on the same page that we've got no option but to do business with the Taliban. I again say none of you have actually taken Christine's point, squarely on that this is sort of a victory moment for Pakistan, that Pakistan hopes to puppeteer the Taliban. Ambassador Prakash believes that will not happen quite to script. What do you think, Daulat Saab?
Yeah, I'm very glad that our diplomats are beginning to think somewhat like me. But let me come to what that India is screwed. I don't think India is screwed to start with. But if we are screwed, it's because of the Americans. We've been holding on to the Americans for far too long in Afghanistan, thinking that as long as the Americans are there, we are safe. And I think it was Kissinger who said that, being on the wrong side of America could be dangerous. But being a friend of the Americans is fatal. So I think that has been borne out by what has happened in the region time and time again. And, this business about Pakistan triumphalism, of course there's triumphalism. There's no doubt about it. I mean, it's writ large on the face of Imran Khan as well. But it's, like Ambassador Raghavan rightly said, it's, there would be concern there as well, like there is concern for us in Kashmir. There is excitement in Kashmir also with what is happening in Afghanistan. And the former DG, last DG of J&K said that this will embolden militancy in Kashmir. So I think in Pakistan also there are somber voices who are worried about the influence of the Taliban on the TTP, and that they are closely linked, So it's not as if everybody there is very happy. But I think looking ahead, you will see in course of time, our diplomats should know much better, but all the regional powers are going to gradually recognize the Taliban. And my only thing is that we should not be left out of this as we were last time, and then have to face a
Right.
situation that we did during the hijacking of 814.
My question would be, we may not want to be left out, but how do we insinuate ourselves into this equation in a role that is meaningful for us? Christine, you've heard all three of our sort of security affairs experts basically all making the point that you've got to engage. India has to engage. There is no other option. The important point about the consequences for Kashmir, I remember reporting from Kashmir at a time when we used to get terrorists coming in from Afghanistan. That had stopped in the middle. That could now resume. There are many, many concerns here. But when Ambassador Prakash or others say, look, you have no option but to engage, and all you can do is to use your influence to mitigate their extremism, you would say what, Christine?
So first of all, I'm not an Indian. It's not my job to counter those opinions, right? I'm an American.
No, but you understand, you
primary
study these terror groups closely, and I ask from that perspective.
Yeah, I know, but I'm not going to white-splain to ambassadors of India what India should or shouldn't do. That's just not how I roll. What I will say is that the relationship between the United States and India it's a challenging one. The Indians have always had legitimate problems with the U.S. relationship with Pakistan, and I've always been very sympathetic, even when I've been in the unfortunate position of having to explain U.S. policy. Once the United States decided that this was always the problem with this conflict, right? It's basically logistics. Once the United States decided to have a large footprint in Afghanistan, which was necessary if you were going to take on the Taliban, there was no way of fighting that war in a way that would allow you to hold Pakistan accountable, right? The Americans were never able to get over the issue of Pakistani GLOCs, ground lines of control, and the Pakistani air lines of control, for reasons that are relatively inexplicable to me. The Americans could never figure out a way of working with the Iranians, even though Pakistan's far more dangerous than the Iranians. And the northern distribution route was always undermined by Russia. So, in a really strange way, President Biden was right, and I agreed with him in 2010, that the way forward was a counterterrorism plus forward rather than having this counterinsurgency footprint, because I understood that it was the Pakistan problem. We needed the surge because of Pakistan, and yet the surge made us ever more dependent upon them. But unfortunately, what Biden, and I did have the pleasure of having dinner with him with about 6 other people right after he became the vice president. He understood the Pakistan problem. Americans, by the way, understand the Pakistan problem. It's a lie to say that we don't understand it. The real issue is that Americans are too afraid to change the policy course, right? They would rather, and it's not something I agree with. I think everyone knows that. I believe in a paradigm shift. I believed in it long ago. But the Americans are like any other political class. India is no different. Politicians are risk averse, right? What they really want to do is get reelected so that they can continue to wage influence. They always put their personal priorities above the oath to the Constitution that they take. And so I give the example of a broken parking meter for those who are old enough to remember actually having parking meter. You put a quarter in a broken parking meter, and instead of getting 15 minutes, you get 2. But it's a predictable 2 minutes that you're overpaying for. If you whack the parking meter on the head, you might put a quarter in and get minus 15 minutes, right? And I think that's the paradigm. And Pakistan, again, as someone who's been studying this region now for 30 years, it's really difficult for me to contain my anger because the Pakistanis have coerced the international community. They've coerced India, quite frankly, with their nuclear weapons and their terrorism. The whole world thinks Pakistan is too dangerous to fail. But what I will say to the point about the Indians were relying upon the United States and Afghanistan, I think this isn't taking responsibility for the fact that India really didn't have a consistent plan on how they would stay in Afghanistan. There were always debates. Are we going to be willing to send troops to protect our diplomats, for example? And so what ended up happening is that you would have Indo-Tibetan police forces, very modest deployments of them protecting Indian diplomats. So it's absolutely the case that the Americans were always wary of Indian involvement because of their concerns about placating Pakistan. But it's
And
also the
my
case that
sorry.
India never had a plan.
And I think my question to the panel in last comments would be what could or should that plan be now? Ambassador Ashraf Haidari, you said that you are still hopeful that that there could be a government that represents voices other than the Taliban. Do you have any reason to believe, and you've heard the diplomats talk about this, that the Taliban this time around, might not inflict the horror that they did the first time around, or do you think that this is the lull before the storm, as it were, for the Afghan people, in particular for Afghan women?
Well, I wish that the international community, including our neighbors, have listened to Afghans. And listen, even now, I get on these talk shows, they just become about, a discussion of how certain countries, of course, in this case, India's self-interest should be, served from different perspectives. And the three speakers have, more or less converging perspectives on how that should be accomplished. And I haven't really heard anything from them, from you, with the exception of Christine, about Afghanistan, about the interest of the Afghan people. Even on the humanitarian issue, we have 1.3 billion, launched in humanitarian appeal by the United Nations. And here is an opportunity for India to step forward, for Russia to step forward, for China, for the rest in the region and outside to help these thousands of Afghans who have been displaced over the past 3 months. There's no discussion of, unfortunately, the suffering, the miseries, and the pain of the Afghan people over the past 40 years. Even when it comes to, how to work with the Taliban from different, angles, be it from the region and outside. A discussion of how to work together, regional and extra-regional stakeholders to, get the kind of, results that would best serve the, interests and the concerns and the basic
what would
needs.
What would you advise
I'm just
now
coming
for that
to that.
happen?
I'm coming. I'm not, but I'm coming. Just give me, for God's sake, a second, because you guys are not listening. All you talk is, India. I'll talk is America. I'll talk is NATO. I'll talk is, even just I just saw this picture of the president of Turkey saying that they're going to, build a wall, or the president of France also just recently discussed how they should protect themselves from irregular migrants, of course, meaning Afghans. And I retweeted with a comment, and that, caught the, attention of global citizens who actually care about, human rights and the basic needs of the Afghan people. One reason why we have failed, unfortunately, over the past 20 years, and it's just not new, and we just got the strategy on our hands, is that none of the countries, unfortunately, in our neighborhood, as much as our destinies are intertwined, our interests are shared, as much as we talk about all these good things, connectivity, win-win, cooperation against confrontation, unfortunately, we haven't seen it in practice. We haven't seen it in practice. We haven't seen it in ways that are strategic, that are coordinated, that are communicated, and to help stabilize Afghanistan in ways that actually alleviate the pains of the Afghan people. So as a result, then it ends up becoming a conflict of many different interests. Interests of Pakistan not meeting the interests of India, that of Iran with that of the United States with China, China with US, and then Russia with US, and vice versa. So what you have in Afghanistan, unfortunately, is that everyone talks and everyone opposes and everyone has the capacity to somehow serve their self-interest, as we see all these discussions being dominated by that. And as with Afghans outside the car, unfortunately, in our own land and in our own space, unfortunately. This graveyard of empire is bullshit, with all due respect. And thanks, Christine, for pointing that out. Which other country has not been the graveyard of empires? Not Europe. Europe has been, for God's sake, fighting 2 world wars until last century. So please, let's not use that. Let's get together. Let's help build Afghanistan. This externality of the Taliban, which each one of you have discuss and agree, that needs to be addressed. How can we work together to address that?
So what should
How
happen
can
now,
we really-
Ambassador? What
so
should
what
happen
should be
now?
done right now, coming back, is to help Afghans, help the Taliban, work with the Taliban through incentives and disincentives, so that they really include, everyone in this process to move forward with a interim and then a permanent government that is as inclusive as possible, serving the long-term interests of the Afghan people. Because if that happens, there would be stability, even if there's certain influences from the region. But let's, for God's sake, end this. Let's just, this time around, put Afghans before our self-interest. For once, if we do that, believe me, we would achieve peace and stability in Afghanistan, and thereby, helping serve everyone's interests.
So
South Asia, Central
can I
Asia,
ask you, though,
China,
before I get the
India,
others to
and all
respond
of
to
this.
what you've
So
said,
we
may
are
I
not-
ask
we
you,
are not-
Ambassador?
We are not seeing that. We are not seeing
I
that.
have a question
It's
for
very
you,
apparent
sir.
from these discussions.
Fair
and
enough. I get.
We are demoralized and unfortunately betrayed by everyone, not just the United States and the Biden administration, but foremost by our own neighborhood.
Okay, I hear you, and I want to ask you one last question briefly, and then take last comments in response specifically to what you've said. Do you then think that the way ahead is for the neighborhood, as you call it, to find a way to work with the Taliban, to moderate the Taliban? Is that even possible?
Why not? It's possible, of course. SCO is, when it talks about 2/3 of the world's population and of 2/3 of the world's GDP. Of course, it is an agenda. We'd like to just benefit from the same peaceful, basic life that Chinese, enjoy, Indians enjoy, Pakistanis enjoy, the rest of Central Asia enjoy. Why can all these countries present in the ACO work together to help ensure that Afghanistan also, enjoy the same?
I would like to hear responses to what you've said.
Democratic regime, but at least is put on a path towards prosperity with the rest of the region. It's possible they can do it. They have the influence, but unfortunately, it's all talk. It's not walking the talk.
All right, AS Daulat pick that up. I mean, we have, and understandably so, an angry Ambassador Ashraf Haidari, and that has always been the tragedy of Afghanistan, that it has always been viewed through the strategic interests of the countries around it. And I take that point. And even in this conversation, we have approached it in a similar way, after sort of expressing a lament for what the Afghan people are going through. But to his point, I don't know, maybe I'm just cynical. Maybe I still think that this Taliban can't be moderated, but what other option is there could be the counter question. Daulat Saab, I'll start with you and take last comments. Daulat Saab.
No, I am fully in consonance with what the Afghan ambassador just said. And I can understand how he must feel at this point of time. In Colombo, it must be very lonely. So if you think that what I said about the graveyard of empires is bullshit, I take it back, Ambassador, no problem. And I would go along with you. My gut feeling also tells me that, this time around, the Taliban is going to be more open and is going to reach out more. So you could see, hopefully, a sort of coalition in new coalition in Afghanistan. Recently, there was a visit by some Tajik leaders to Pakistan, and I thought that was significant. I think Ambassador Raghavan would understand that better. But I mean, it might sound absolutely crazy, but to take up what Ambassador Ashraf said, is it impossible for India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan to work together?
I don't know. Christine, do you want to answer that before I get the two Indian diplomats to respond? Daulat Saab, I don't know. Have we managed to work with Pakistan that we are now going to work with them and Afghanistan together? Look at where our relationship is with Pakistan, Daulat Saab. I mean, when you propose this, it's a kind of utopian.
Exactly. This is what.
May I actually add a further complicating wrinkle?
Daulat
It's
Saab,
now
just one
China.
second. Dulat Saab, very important point from Christine. Christine, go ahead, and then Dulat Saab can respond to it, and we'll end with the ambassadors. Christine, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just think this is a khwab. And the reason is the Taliban are not different. If the Taliban were different, they wouldn't have done what they have done, right? Second, this is not Taliban 1.0 in the sense where they're just a bunch of, you know, cave dwellers. China, over the last 20 years, has become the single largest direct investor in Afghanistan. For example, the copper mine at Anak, they weren't able to get the stuff out of the ground into the market. So the Chinese have always been very willing to work with the Taliban. I'm sure Indian diplomats will recall their very close relationship that they had prior to 9/11. The Chinese were even close to signing a memorandum of agreement with Osama bin Laden prior to 9/11. So what India has in Afghanistan is not just a terror regime which has long worked with the Deobandi militant groups that have targeted India. If you let me respond to the TTP comment, right? I am quite tired of the facile conflation that Pakistan does. How can we support the Taliban when we're a victim of the Taliban? So it is the TTP is comprised of some elements that are anti-Pakistan, but the TTP also has elements that are pro-Pakistan. They're not singularly arrayed in one direction or another. And how the Pakistanis dealt with the TTP beginning sometime around 2013, 2014, is that they revivified Jaish-e-Mohammed, right? Masood Azhar had been silently in Bawalpur. The ISI had been helping him resurrect his organization, which had largely crumbled, and the people who disagreed with remaining loyal to Musharraf defected, and they became sort of like the crux, if you will, of the TTP. So the ISI was dedicating resources to rebuilding Jaish-e-Mohammed, and Jaish-e-Mohammed was sort of a garvapasi, if you will, for these Pakistani Taliban. The Pakistanis know how to handle this. And what I really, you have to look at where the TTP commits their violence. Where they overreached in the 2000s is when they reached into the Punjab, when Punjabis could no longer have their nahari at Food Street in Lahore. That's when the Tutti hit the punka, right? I don't think the Pakistani Taliban have not learned that lesson, right? Look at where their attacks have remained. Pakistanis have contempt for anyone who lives west of the Indus, right? They think it's like Junglistan. And so as long as the TTP engage in their shenanigans, largely affecting Pashtuns, this aligns with the state interest, right? The state has the biggest foe of the state right now are actually those Pashtuns who saw through the bullshit and were fighting back, right? So I want people to stop saying, well, the Pakistanis, this is a crown of thorns. That implies that Pakistan is the Messiah? Oh, by the way, so that is not an image we should embrace.
So I just quickly need to get the two ambassadors to respond. So, that is the response to Dulat Saab's somewhat utopian proposal of the three countries working together. But I hear Ambassador Ashraf's rage as well. I understand it. I can't imagine, none of us can begin to imagine what he and people of his country may be feeling today. I will come to you, Ambassador Raghavan, and then give the last word to Ambassador Prakash. Moderating the Taliban, is it a possibility? Christine says no. I agree with her. Ambassador Ashraf would say, what's the option?
Well, I would say we shouldn't rule out looking at the situation through a system of incentives and disincentives. You're choosing from a menu of bad options. And if this is the best of the bad options, why not try it? As I said, we are not the United States. We are not New Zealand. We are not Germany. What is happening in our region, good or bad as it is, we are tied to it, and the region is tied to us. So I think we should always approach Afghanistan through that view. And while it is certainly true that regional cooperation is the only way out, the fact also is that India and Pakistan, or for that matter, India and China, have 100 good reasons to cooperate with each other, quite apart from Afghanistan, which is also a very good reason. But we all know why that doesn't happen. So yes, I think regional cooperation is the way out, but regional cooperation, there are limits, and those limits are set by not by non-Afghanistan related developments. I certainly think a way forward in Afghanistan has always been a better relationship and addressing the interface between India and Pakistan. But there are numerous reasons why that is not easy to put together. But there's no good reason as to why we should not persist with it. And certainly,
Right.
I agree with Dullat Saab that because of our particular history, we should never rule out a set of possibilities which may exist, even if it's only in ideal terms or theoretical terms just now.
So let me give you, Ambassador Prakash, the last word. I think the one consensus that we all have is that you cannot actually do anything in Afghanistan effectively till we solve the Pakistan issue. There is a kind of intractable situation here from the Indian perspective and even from the Afghanistan perspective. So when Ambassador Ashraf Haidari says, why don't you all get together? Because, with you all squabbling, this is a new version of the great game and so on. What would you say, sir? Last word, Ambassador Prakash.
Imran Taliban Khan calls Osama bin Laden a martyr, calls what has happened in Afghanistan freedom, breaking of shackles. So unless Harry Potter comes down with a magic wand, nothing is going to happen as far as I'm concerned to Pakistan. Nobody can help them. They have to decide themselves. The day they introspect, things will begin to change. Ambassador Ashraf, I know the trauma. I know what Afghanistan has gone through. I don't think that anybody can say that we are not to be blamed. And what I'm saying is going to say something may sound heartless, but I think the leadership of Afghanistan also needs to introspect. When President Ghani one day tells people to stand firm, that they are regrouping, and second day he hugs Taliban, the message goes out which should not be going out. Now, as far as Christine mentioned about American presidents and the re-election, now here is an American president who does not want to, perhaps does not have any interest or much of an interest in getting re-elected. He comes on a platform of being a votary of democracy, human rights, freedom of women, religious freedoms. And then what he does is slightly different. There is periodically talk of Indian boots on the ground. But let's not forget, Americans have said it very clearly that the purpose of Americans' presence in Afghanistan was to make sure that the threat to America from Afghanistan soil does not happen. The threat to India was never factored in. So there are certain realities. As far as Pakistan is concerned, their perfidy has caused a loss of life for Americans. American boys and girls have died. I do not understand even now why America does not smell the coffee when it comes to Pakistan. Barkha.
Yeah, I think that is the sort of the giant elephant in the room. And I personally think that with apologies to Dullat Saab, whom I have a lot of respect, that I just don't see this regional cooperation taking shape. And of course, Ambassador Ashraf, that is at the cost, unfortunately, of the future of the Afghan people, and that must make you so angry today. But what can we say? We have to see what happens in the days to come. The Taliban making all the right noises, interestingly, right now, offering amnesty, urging women to join the government. We've got to see whether they make good on this as time goes along. I think we need some test of time before any of our countries can really respond. Leaving it there to Ambassador Ashraf, Professor Christine Fair, Ambassadors Raghavan and Prakash and AS Daulat. Pleasure as always. And to our audience, thank you for watching. You've been an extremely engaged audience. We'll see you tomorrow at the same time, same place. See you then. Goodbye. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.